Looks like my microphone is on. Welcome, everyone. I'm the one standing between you and lunch, so let's make sure that we stay on time. This talk is going to be about, like Luca said, on application diagnostics in Azure. Before diving into that, I do want to give one disclaimer, which is that I will be focusing on application diagnostics and not really on things like how is my CPU going, how many instances am I running on Azure, what are my machines doing, how is my operating system being patched, and so on. So really the stuff you would be monitoring inside your own application. Having that said, let's dive in. So I'm Maarten Balliauw. I flew in from Antwerp, Belgium. I work at JetBrains. I also have my own startup, MyGit, which I will be using for some of the demos. My main focus is on anything web and cloud related, so I love doing those things. And if you go to my blog, you will also be able to find some information and some articles I wrote on these topics, as well as some things that are going to be seen in this talk. So definitely have a look there as well. So first of all, before diving into application insights on Azure, let's maybe dive into logging. Because if you look at logging, we will clearly see that most log files we have in our applications just suck. They really suck, and I will give you some examples. And then we'll float into semantic and structured logging, where you can bring some structure to your logging, which then flows nicely into application insights on Azure. So with that, let's go. All right, logging. Typically, why would you log stuff in your application? Well, typically, you would do it for troubleshooting. You want to know what is going on in your application, and you want to see what's happening, where did a problem occur or not, and so on. Maybe you also want logging to sort of look into performance and cost of your application. You want to be able to see, okay, how many requests are coming in, and based on that number of requests, maybe you need some additional machines and so on. Maybe browsing through the logs, you will find that your application needs some improvements. For example, if you see one specific exception a number of times, maybe it's time to look into why that exception is happening and either fix the cause of that exception or just catch the exception and really solve what's going on in your application. Also, problems that may occur. For example, your disk runs out of space. Typically, what you would want to do is run that in log that into your log files and look into, where is that disk space consumption coming from? How can I fix this in my application? Customer experience, same thing. Are people happy? If continuously you see in your log files that a request takes 5 seconds to load a very simple page on your web application, maybe you want to improve that to improve customer experience as well. And maybe some business decisions as well. For example, you may want to log your page views on your application, but maybe you want to be able to correlate them with the number of orders that go through your application so that the business can use those logs to basically improve the marketing or improve the sales process there. That's all fine in theory, but in practice, it's not so good usually. So this is what I typically see in a lot of applications. We use systemdiagnostics.trace or we use log4net where we just write stuff into a log file, and typically it's something like this, what you see here. Something happened in the application or an exception occurred and we log error plus the exception message. Not a stack trace, not a session of the user, not the machine this thing was running on, not the date and the time, not the current status of the moon. I don't know what you want to correlate, but this is very basic and probably too basic of a log information. So this does not really help troubleshooting. This is a typical log that I took from my machine. It came from an MSI installer. So typically when you install anything on your machine, you will get this MSI log. If you look at the things that are in there, it's not really useful. Information 0, customer address updated. That's great for that customer, but I have no idea which customer it was. I have no idea what the address was before and after. I have no idea why they did it, in which screen they did it, and so on. The next one in there, an error, a null reference exception occurred. Value cannot be null. Yeah, that's quite common if you have a null reference exception that the value cannot be null, and that's the cause of the exception. But where did it come from? Why is the value null? No idea. Machine policy value debug is 0. I don't even have an idea what that could mean. Then some verbose information. Typically, you can add some verbose information, more details about what is happening in the application. A nice example there, run engine, action, command line. Again, not very useful. There's no context, there's not even information in there. I think this is just a template that was in there, but it's a typical log you would find in a lot of projects. And I think everyone in this room has been writing log files like this. At least I know I have. So it does not really help us troubleshoot. If we know where a specific statement is being logged, we can sort of try to figure out why something happened, but this is not the information you want to have to base your decisions in the application on. So it doesn't help. Log files really, really suck. They are typically just string data in a file somewhere or in a database or in an event log. There are some better ways of doing things like ETW, event tracing for Windows, or using a proper system.diagnostics trace listener, but typically it's just plain string data with not a lot of information in there. A typical log file also does not have context. Like I said, which machine did it run on? What time? Which was the user session? Did they log in using username, password, or did they use Azure AD? Or all that contextual information is missing from a typical log file. Typically, you also have no correlation. How much memory was being used? Maybe this operation took 5 minutes because we had a garbage collection going on in there. Or the memory was just too high and some swapping was occurring on the machine and so on. Another really important one is how to get the data off of our machines. Even if you have string data, how do you get, like, imagine if you have a web farm of 6 servers, how do you get from those 6 servers all the different log files and make sure that you have one consistent view on top of those log files where everything is ordered chronologically, where you can do filtering and so on? Not really simple. How do you report and analyze exactly that thing? How do you process those log files that you get off the machine, and how do you make them searchable and make them useful to go through? There are some solutions like Logstash and Elasticsearch where you would build a pipeline where you would process the log files, then dump them into a search engine where you can put a view on top and go through that. But that's quite cumbersome to set up, quite error prone as well. Not all versions work together really nicely. And you have maintenance, and you have to spin up a couple of machines basically just to process log information. So not really awesome. What if we had better contextual information in our log files? Well, a good example is in every machine in Windows. If you open the event viewer, typically what you would see is an application log, a system log, security log, and so on. And in there, you would see a message, but also contextual information. We can see in this particular case that it was something in the application log. Provider name was eSent. There was an event ID, a level, task, keywords, time created, some custom data, and so on. Not really useful as a human being to go through this, but if I would write a very simple tool that would parse the XML we get in there, I would be able to see what was happening, correlate everything, and read that contextual information that in the end will help me build a better application or figure out why something happened in the application. So, event tracing for Windows is one of the approaches we can do, so that's this one. Other things we can do is use, for example, Serilog or the semantic logging block that's available in Patterns and Practices, where you basically start doing structured or semantic logging, where your message is not just a message, but the message is also linked to a specific context. And I'll give you a quick example of Serilog in a minute. So Sirilog is one we will look into in a little bit. I first want to drill into the event source, because event source is something that is inside the .NET framework. We can just start working with it, and it's actually a really good way of doing structured logging. So let's dive in there. If we switch to the IDE, I have an event source there, which would do a simple, some business logic in my application. So basically, this thing would just start my application and then perform business logic. Creating a customer and then logging the fact that I created a customer. Sending a welcome email, then logging that I sent a welcome email. Generating an invoice, then logging that I started creating an invoice. Adding the logo to the invoice, and if we get a file not found exception where we cannot find the logo on disk, we just log that the logo is missing, and in the end we finish the invoice and log the fact that we created the invoice. So if we would log this thing, we would clearly see a new customer was created, we sent a welcome email, we started creating an invoice, we did this, and then we finished creating the invoice. Awesome. Also, code-wise, it's not really difficult to write these log statements. All I have to do is create a specific class, and I'll dive into it in a little bit, and add some methods on there where I say, okay, create me a customer, where I pass in the customer ID, customer name, customer email. Why? Just to be able to consult those in my log files afterwards so that I can not only see that I created a customer, but that I can see that I created this customer with this specific ID, this specific name, this specific email, and so on. Same thing with all the others. Right. Now let's dive into how we can do this ETW tracing. We have to create an event source for that. And the event source is a pretty simple class that inherits from event source, which you give a name by applying an attribute on it, and then you just start creating all the different methods of things you want to log. So for example, if you want to create a customer, we simply create a create customer method, pass in the ID, name, and email, and then just write the event with a number and then all the different data tokens that I want to store in there. Now, the cool thing is that it's really easy to do this. The sort of issue there is that I have to do a lot of things to get this to work. So first of all, I have to create this method. So for every single thing that I want to log in this structured logging mechanism, I have to create this method. I have to call write event, and for every event or every type of log, I have to pass in an ID, like an event ID, and then all that data. Not only that, I have to register this thing somehow with Windows, and in order to do that, there's a tool that basically scans the classes that I have there and looks at these event attributes there. So I also have to attribute this thing, or add an attribute to this method, saying that, okay, this create customer method will have a message in this format, has event ID number 1, and it's informational. We may have a warning as well. So for example, if the logo does not exist, that's event ID 9. I have a warning, company logo does not exist, etc. There's a lot of ceremony involved in getting this set up. It's a good way of doing things, but it's cumbersome to do. So yeah, let's see if there are better things to use there. So event sources, again, are super awesome. You can just use them to log whatever you want to log. The only problem I see with them is that they are cumbersome to create, and they're also cumbersome to maintain. What if your next version of your application that you will be deploying tomorrow will log an additional property on the create customer log event? What will happen? Windows will be confused. You basically have to do versioning and make sure that this specific event maps to a certain version of your application, etc., to be able to look into that structured data that is in there. So it's yeah, complicated to do, and a lot of code to write for basically a very, very simple thing. So Serilog to the rescue. Serilog is another logging library that I'm a big fan of. And they basically built a logging library very similar to system.diagnostics.trace, or similar to Log4Net or nlog, but they put structured logging as a first-class citizen in there. So basically, whenever you log something in Serilog, Serilog will log both the simple, stupid string message that you want to pass in there, but also any type of object you give it as contextual information. So for example, with Serilog, I would be able to log something to console and simply see a stupid string like in a typical log file, but I would also be able to fetch the customer object from that log message and look into which customer was being created and so on. So it's really interesting to do. Other nice thing about Serilog is that it has a lot of syncs that you can link to it. So you basically use Serilog, you write log events to that thing, and then you have one or multiple syncs that basically write to console, write to a text file, write to a database, or to AppInsights or an Elasticsearch instance, and so on. So structured data in Serilog. If you log a message in Serilog, and I will show you a code example in a few seconds, if you log data in there, you will see that you have to log a message, so a simple string, where you put in some placeholders. Like for example, if you want to have a customer ID, you put a placeholder that says customer.id, and then the message will be rendered like that. But you can also pass those objects with it. So these objects can be simple scalar values. A customer ID, which is an integer, well, you can just push that into your Serilog context, and it will be logged as well. If you want to log a full object, like a full customer object with all the different properties, very much possible. If you want to log your full ASP.NET session state, I would not recommend it, but imagine you may want to do that. It's possible with Serilog. All right, let's have a look at how this thing works. So first of all, if you want to use Sirilog, you have to install one NuGet package. The NuGet package is the Sirilog package, which is this one there. The Sirilog package is the one that enables you to do logging. It accepts messages, it accepts these objects that you may want to log in there, and that's everything it does. If you want to log somewhere useful, like to console or to a text file or to AppInsights or to a reactive extension or whatever you want to do, you have to also install sinks in Sirilog. Now, if you search for my screen is too small, Sirilog.sinks, you will see that on NuGet there are like 86 sinks that you can use. So you can log to console, Elasticsearch, system.diagnostics.trace, to a text file, to XML, to a database, SQL, MySQL, Postgres, and so on. So wherever you may want to push your log information, you can install one of these sinks. All right, how to configure it? Well, what you do is you simply say, okay, create me a new logger configuration. I want to fetch all the debug messages. I will cover these enrichers in a little bit. And I'm going to write to my console and to a rolling file. That's pretty much it. Then I can do my business logic. And just like in the previous example, I can create a customer and then log information saying that I'm creating customer and then add customer and just pass in the entire customer objects. If I do this, Sirilog will log creating customer and then just call toString on my customer object to log it to a text file, but the entire object is also available in the logging context. So if I were to write to, say, AppInsights or a SQL database, I would also have that entire customer object in there. And I could be able to search for log entries that match a specific customer ID, for example. So that's really useful to have. Same thing with the welcome email. I can just put the customer ID in there and just pass in the customer ID. Special thing here, I'm also passing in my entire customer objects. It will not be logged as a simple string, my customer object, but it will be available in the context and will be sent off to the sink where I'm storing my logging data. So that's really, really useful to do. All right, let's quickly run this thing. And if I run that thing, we will see that I'm getting some log information because I'm logging to console. I will see that I'm creating a customer, sent a welcome email, started invoice creation, and so on. Cool thing was, in that first message where I said creating a customer and I passed in the entire customer object, you can see that I'm actually getting the customer ID, customer name, and customer email in that log message. That's quite cool. It's not that cool because it's not easy to search in because it's just a bunch of strings. But again, this object is also sent to any other sinks that I may have configured. And I'll cover that in one of the later demos. One nice thing is I was also writing to disk. If I look at my log on disk, you will see more information. So in here, I also have my machine name. I have a thread ID as well. So I have some additional information that's available in one of the sinks, but not in the others. The console one will simply just write strings. In other ones, I can add more information. Now, where does this machine name come from? And where does this thread ID come from? And where does whatever contextual information you want to pass in there come from? Well, the simplest way of doing that would be to just, in my log message, add environment.machinename and so on. That would be really simple to do. The problem with that is that I would have to add that contextual information to any log message that I'm writing to Sirilog. So I don't want to do that. Instead, what I can do is add an enricher. So what I'm doing here is saying, okay, enrich every single log message with the machine name enricher. If we go into that one, you will see that whenever my current log event does not have a property called machine name, add it and pass in the machine name. That's a useful one. Maybe you're building an application where you want to add the entire claims identity or auth token that was passed into your application. Well, simply create a an enricher in Sirilog, and it will be available in all that data. Right. So enrichment of data is something you probably want to do if you start using Sirilog because you want to keep your log messages or your your ceremony to log information as small as possible. You just want to log, I'm creating this customer, and all the other information that is available in the current context, you want to add it to the log events by adding an enricher in there. Examples could be a machine name enricher, process ID enricher, ASP.NET information. Maybe you want to log the client IP, but also look into a geo-location service where you also log the city and the country of the user that is currently hitting your application. Things like that you could add using an enricher in there. Another nice thing is that you don't have to do this all in Serilog. So if you are using Serilog and, for example, ASP.NET, or any OWIN-based type of application, you can also add, for example, a middleware that just pushes information into the current log context. So in this case, what I'm doing is, instead of creating this enricher in Serilog, I'm just adding a middleware that captures my current claims identity and passes the entire object into my current logging context, so it will be shipped off to my sink, basically in the back. One word of warning here. This information may go over the wire depending on which sink you have configured. So this is probably not a good example because you are passing your entire identity claims information to a third-party system or to a system you own, but it's leaving the machine, it's leaving the current process. So be careful of what you log, or maybe do some filtering or something like that, but it can still be useful to do. Right, a couple of problems do remain. Serilog is awesome. I can configure this sink and I can log, for example, to a text file or to XML or to a database and so on. But how do I get that data off my machine? With a database, it's simple. I'm just logging to the database and be done with it. If I'm logging to text files or XML files on disk, I still have to get them off the machine. How do we analyze all this information? If we log to a SQL server, for example, we can write some SQL queries and start slicing and dicing all the log information we have. But still, do you want to pay a massive SQL server license to store your log information? I don't know. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Also, how do you correlate that information with probable other systems? So imagine you have your log information and you want to link this to your CRM information to see, okay, we changed this thing in the website, that page is now a little bit quicker than it was before. How can I correlate that with the number of sales? Did the sales go up because we made the application faster? Things like that. How do we correlate those things? And more importantly, do I want to spin up my own infrastructure to basically manage all that and collect all that information? My answer to that would be no in a lot of cases. I would use the cloud for that. Azure has a couple of ways to analyze all this type of information. One you will definitely have already seen is Azure Insights. Typically, when you go into the Azure portal, you will see these nice graphs of CPU usage, of disk writes and reads per second. All that type of information, that's Azure Insights. It's basically monitoring out of the box. The platform is trying to give you information that it can receive without doing anything special. There's Application Insights, which is really focused around logging and correlating things that are happening in your application. And then there's Operation Management Suite, or Log Analytics. It's part of Operations Management Suite, where you can correlate across different applications and link all those things together. I'm not going to cover Azure Insights, not going to cover Log Analytics, but I am going to cover Application Insights. So let's do that. Application Insights. It's a sort of simple name for a service and an SDK that gives you a lot of information and a lot of benefits and value if you start using it. So first of all, there's a service. If you go to the portal, you create a new Azure Application Insights service, and you can add whatever you want in there. You can start slicing and dicing the information in there. Of course, the information has to be somehow provided to Application Insights, and that's where the libraries and SDKs come in handy. By combining the fact that it's a service as well as an SDK and a client-side library, it actually solves the issue of where do I store all that information, how do I ship that information to a centralized system, and how do I analyze that information. Application Insights out of the box also enriches your data. So for example, if you want to correlate a specific trace message with the current CPU usage on the machine, you don't have to do anything special. The information is already in AppInsights. The only thing you have to do is query it. That's basically it. It has telemetry, so it basically allows you to not only ship log information to AppInsights, but it also will log things like custom events. For example, whenever a new order is being placed through our website, we could log an event to Application Insights so that we can correlate the fact that since this deployment, we improved our performance of the application. Did sales go up because of that reason? It's not like a full link with your CRM system, but it does give you a metric to look into and maybe decide where the value is in the application. Maybe making the application faster is not useful and people still buy your product. Well, then don't make the application faster. But by having that telemetry, it's really useful to combine that information and do something useful with it. I will be demoing with web applications, but do keep in mind you can also use Application Insights with pretty much any type of application, whether it's a web application in .NET platform, PHP, Node.js, Python, or whatever, whether it's a Windows application or a Xamarin application, whether it's a mobile application, it basically works in any type of application you may want to be running. And it also works in pretty much any programming language that is available. So there's SDKs for all the popular languages, and if there's no SDK for your COBOL-based application, you could write your own REST client just posting data to Application Insights there. Right, let's get started with Application Insights. So in the Azure portal, it's really simple to get started with Application Insights. You just create a new service, and I'll maybe zoom in a little bit. There we go. You wait for the internet to come back. Fantastic. Let's try again. That's a bummer. I'm going to refresh that one and see if it comes back. It does something, so that's a good thing. It's really simple to get started with Application Insights. All you have to do is create this service in the portal, which I was about to show you. So you just create a new service, search for Application Insights, next, finish, basically, and it's available. We're not going to create a new application. And once you have one, you will get this type of portal, and I hope that one loads, where you will see all the different types of information that are available and that you can use in your application. So let's see. That doesn't look too good. All right, who is posting pictures to Facebook or whatever? Nobody? Stop using your cell phones. Let's try one more time. That's not a good thing. Let's try that one. All right, let's skip to the client first and hope the internet is better after that part. On the client side, there's a couple of ways to get started with AppInsights. So, like I said, you have to have a service in the Azure portal, and you also have to install one of the various client SDKs that are available. How can you do this? Well, if you are smart enough not to fiddle with your Visual Studio extensions, you can basically right-click any .NET application and say, configure Application Insights, and yay, it's back. That's fantastic. So you basically click Configure Application Insights. It will open up a wizard which will tell you, okay, you have to add the SDK. It will give you all the different NuGet packages that have to be installed. You copy your API key from the portal, you put it in there, and that's it. Nothing else. If you're using .NET Core or ASP.NET vNext, there's a couple of things you still have to do. One of which is in your startup. You basically have to, where is it? Add Application Insights telemetry. That's everything. You have to add that service to your application. If you also want to have information about the current number of requests in the ASP.NET side of things, you also can add the Application Insights request telemetry middleware, and also exception telemetry if you want to be able to track exceptions that occur in the application. But that's it. 3 lines of code, one simple configuration file that contains your API key, and you're good to go. You can deploy, and data will start showing up in the Azure portal, if it works. Let's try once more. I love doing sessions that require internet connection. Chris up there, are you doing anything fancy? Perfect, thanks. All right, let's try once more. If not, I have a very, very difficult task ahead. All right, seems it's reloading somehow. Yeah, let's wait for it. All right, I'm going to freewheel a little bit in terms of demos based on this new information about the internet connectivity, so I will focus a little bit more on the client. So what I was about to show you in the portal was that you need several things on your application and maybe on your machine. So for example, if you do want correlation information about CPU usage and memory usage in your application, you have to install some agent in your application. If you're running on ASP.NET Web Apps, for example, that agent is already in there, you just have to enable it. But if you run your own VM running Windows on as a VM in Azure, you actually have to install that agent so that it can capture information from IIS and from the machine that you are running your application on. If you want to have request information in ASP.NET, well, like I said, you have to add this request telemetry middleware to get that information. If you want to log custom events, you have to add the telemetry client. Where is that one? And make use of that in your application to be able to log stuff to that thing. So there is this class called, where is it? Yes, there it is, telemetry client, which I can use to track custom events and so on. So based on what information you want to have in your application insights overview, you have to do a couple of things to capture that information, collect it all together, and be able to correlate all that information. It's not rocket science, it's really easy, and there is a very, very nice getting started page which is hidden behind this wonderful cloud and moving bullets. Let's try once more. Which brings me to the next thing. Do I have to run my application on Azure if I want to use Application Insights? Well, the answer to that is no. Application Insights, like I said, is a service and client SDKs, and the service is in Azure, of course. But it's just an API that gets data from your application. So if you want to capture information from your own VM that is running within your own network, you can also install this agent on that machine and just push that data out to Application Insights. If you want to capture information about application usage of a mobile application, install the client SDK, post that data to the service, and be done with it. So your application does not have to run on Azure. Right. I will use my screenshots to give you some more information about AppInsights. Let's maybe quickly switch over. That would cost me a fortune, but the good news is this starts working. So good. Right, AppInsights, like I said, let's step a little bit back if you want to get started. There's a really nice Getting Started tab in here. I usually am not a big fan of these getting started things because they typically contain just some marketing information and nothing really useful for the stuff that you want to achieve. And I think Hotspot is maybe a very good idea. Anyone want to volunteer? That is awesome. Round of applause for this guy. Thank you. Yeah, I'm connected to that one.
Okay. I'll check on my internet, my phone, and it's working fine.
Let's try again. It's the...
It should be above.
Yours is...
Okay. This one is another, it's a hotspot. Should be there.
No. Fantastic.
Let's try again.
Wyłączony ci router.
Włączyłem ponownie.
Hotspot, you said? No? Oh well. Anyway, yeah, let's try it like this. No worries. Thanks again. I'll try that. Airplane mode on, airplane mode off. Let's click a different tab. This one works. I have to reconnect, of course. I think my computer is interested in going for lunch. All right. Yeah, it doesn't work. So anyway, if you want to get started with AppInsights, you just go there and you click one of these blades, and you will be able to look into the different tasks that are required to do things like capturing exceptions, capturing dependencies, which is a really nice feature. So imagine you are building an application and you are using SQL Server in the backend or some REST APIs. You can track dependency call duration and try to identify that maybe your SQL Server is being too slow and influencing your application. If you want to capture performance counters, you have to add this thing to the configuration file, etc. So there's a lot of information on the types of information you can get from your application. So I would definitely say look at the getting started thingy there. And all of a sudden things work again. So seem to work again. That's awesome. All right. That means I can actually do my demos. Good. So AppInsights, if you open it the first time, you will get some information. So whenever you configure it in your application, you will start seeing some information popping up in this portal. So by default, you will see for web applications, you will see things like server response time, page view load time, server request, failed requests, etc. I can click on one of these things, look at the various requests that happened over time. I can see the individual. That didn't work. I can see the individual requests in there. I can click on one of them and see whatever is happening there. So I can see, okay, this thing was requested with a response code 500. The response took 107 milliseconds. I can even click further and drill down into things like what was the client IP address? Was it a PC? Was it a mobile device? What exception happened? Did I make a call to a database, etc.? So there's a lot of information you basically get for free by just adding this SDK into your application. It's also a little bit scary because it really collects a lot of information if you configure everything, but it's really useful to be able to look into why are my requests being slow? How many requests am I seeing? Since the last deployment, are multiple exceptions happening instead of what we had before, and so on. So really useful. I can also see performance buckets. So I can see the speed of my application, and I can see my demo application is really fast because 83% is being served in less than 250 milliseconds. So that's probably a good thing for this demo application I have. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what you can see in the portal. Now what I will be doing is drilling down in all the different things. Do want to go over all the different things that are being logged in my demo applications that I have here. So I'm always logging all the performance counters that I have, so ASP.NET number of requests, exceptions, garbage collections happening, and so on. I'm logging things related to my current requests, both on the server side as well as on the client side. So what I did in my application was also install the client-side SDK, where there's a snippet of JavaScript that I have in my view, which will also post information to AppInsights, which is quite cool, because it allows me to correlate browser load time with maybe something that is happening on the server side. I'm tracking traces, for which I'm using Serilog to send those traces to AppInsights, which is really cool because I showed you this structured logging, which is something I would really recommend you also start doing. But the structured logging allows me to also correlate a request or a performance counter with a specific customer or a specific login that is using my application. That's really, really nice to have. I'm logging exceptions, dependencies, and some custom metrics and so on. So a lot of data. There's different views in the Application Insights portal, and just to give you a feel, I'm just going to go through a lot of them. So I already showed you the basic overview we get here, so it just gives you some information about response time, page view load time, and so on, but there's a lot of other things in there. For example, I can go into my failed requests and drill down into whenever it comes. Basically drill down into the page that caused the exception, and I can try to figure out which exception is happening and on which line of code in my application. So all that information is in there. So apparently I had an exception in my about page of the application. And if I click that one, I will be able to see the exception and drill into the stack trace of that exception, which is really useful. So I can see that there was a file not found exception in my home controller about. So I have something specific to look into in my application. If I look into my application, by the way, you will see that my about page, whenever I add throw to the query string, I'm just throwing a file not found exception. So this is where the exception originates. But it's still cool that AppInsights is able to give me that information that this specific page is throwing an exception. Right, next to all that information, there's a couple of other things. There's the usage. I can see who is using my application, from which countries, and so on. The number of sessions, I can see all those things in there, if they load. So what I did this morning was log into a couple of VPNs and make some requests to my application. I connected to a VPN in Belgium, one in Poland, the network I'm on right now, and one in Germany. So I can see the sessions by country and so on. This is not Google Analytics. This is really intended to see maybe I have a node running somewhere in Germany that is acting up so that I can correlate potential error information with a specific country or a specific region where these exceptions may be happening. So that's the type of information that is in there. Other stuff in there is failures. So I can start drilling down into application failures, look at the exceptions that are happening. I can see a top 10 of exceptions in my application and so on. I can look at performance. How fast is my application? Which page may need some optimization in terms of load speed and so on. I can look at the different servers. How are my CPUs doing and what's the memory doing? It's not as detailed as some other monitoring tools, but it does give you some information, except for this one. I can see browser stats, like how long did it take to render my JavaScript or render my Angular page onto the current view. So I can look into those things as well. Now, let's quickly jump over to a real production application where we can see some things. So what I did earlier today was run a load test on this production application. And you can clearly see where I ran that load test because I put in a lot of requests and I made sure that all those requests were actually throwing an exception. So I can see in here that I actually have a failed request rate going up. Cool thing is, if I go into that one, I can again drill into which URLs were acting up. And as you can see, the hello rockcharp API call that I was doing was just failing. And I can look into the client, I can look when those requests happened, and basically drill down into all the information related to this request. Really nice. The point I was making at the start of this talk was you should be doing semantic logging and you should be doing structured logging. Well, in my demo application, I'm actually doing that. So what I did was I configured Application Insights and I configured Serilog to also capture trace information from Serilog. The way to do that is, by the way, really simple. You just set up Serilog and then say add Serilog using one of the different NuGet packages that are available. And I'm writing to Application Insights. The nice thing about that is on my About page here, I'm running the same business logic, creating a customer, sending a newsletter, and so on and so on. And I'm logging that information to AppInsights. Now, going back to where we had this failed request, where an exception occurred in my application, I can actually drill into that information, look at my About page, wait for it to load. Yes, there we are. And look at all the different telemetry that's available for this operation. So for this operation, this one specific failure I had in my application, I have a number of traces. And one of those traces should be that I'm creating a new customer. Let's see if I can find it. There we go. Start invoice creation for customer. And by using Serilog and this structured logging, I can see that this specific customer with a specific ID, specific name, specific email address, and so on, had an exception occur during his order process. And I may want to contact that customer or try to correlate that specific customer ID with other messages in my logging system so that I can fix a potential bug in the application. So that's really useful. I can see the entire rendered message in my message, so I can see whatever Serilog would print to console. But I can also see the different things like customer.id, customer.email, customer.name, because Serilog is just sending that information all to AppInsights. And I can see those things in there. Really, really nice. Right. So that's a number of demos. One of the additional things that you can do with AppInsights is sending metrics and custom events. So what I can do is simply send things like feature usage to AppInsights so that I can correlate whenever someone is using this feature, they hit an exception, or this feature is too slow, or we get more signups from users using this specific feature, and so on. In my example, in my simple example application, where is it? There we are. I actually did that. So whenever I create a new invoice, I sent a metric called invoices created. I created one invoice, and I passed the customer ID as additional metadata. Again, some sort of structured logging where I say something happened with this specific customer or this specific username or this specific whatever context you want to add there. The nice thing there is that if we go to AppInsights, I can go to my metrics explorer. Where is it? To the metrics explorer and look into, for example, the number of invoices that were created per country. So this morning, again, on all my different VPN connections, I created invoices, and you can see that 8 invoices were created. I can correlate them with the number of page views that were happening. So in this example, you can see that pretty much every request I've been making was also making an invoice in my application. And I can see that in Poland, most of the invoices were created this morning. Again, I can drill into that thing and see the number of requests or the traces related to orders from Poland. I can drill into that information and really explore the entire context of all the information that I sent out there, which is really, really nice. Right, we did logging. One thing I do want to show you is Application Insights Analytics. It's sort of an add-on or a separate product that's inside Application Insights. It is a thing that is based on an internal tool that was being used at Microsoft that allows you to do queries, pretty much free format SQL type queries on top of your logging information. So the cool thing there is all this information that I'm sending to AppInsights and that I can browse through and drill into, I can also run random queries on top of that thing, which is really nice. Because in the example that I just showed you, if you have to investigate an exception, you have to click all these blades and go through all that information and drill down really deeply, go back, drill down again. So really difficult to navigate around. It's good to get a feel of whatever is happening. But the real value of Application Insights, in my opinion, is in this analytics feature that you have, where you can run queries against your application. So let's do that in a little bit. The queries that you can run are based on a data set. So like I said, there's a number of dimensions that you are sending off to Application Insights, like traces, like the custom events we just saw, like page views, like requests, exceptions, etc. I can use those as input for my query. It's like select from, and this would be your table that you are selecting from. There's operators on top of them, so I can do where clauses, I can do counting, I can project, I can join with different data sets. So for example, if I would like to join custom events with traces, I would be able to do that. And then I can render those things as a table, where I can just look at the results, or as a chart, which would give me some graphical information about whatever is in there. So let's see what this is. I'm going to use my demo application first. And from my overview, I can simply click Analytics, which will open up a new tab where I can do additional querying. Authentication in progress. Should not take too long. Right, there we are. So this is the view that you have in Application Insights Analytics. Nice thing there is that there's a number of predefined queries that I can run. So for example, if I want to look at the top 10 countries by traffic in the past 24 hours, I can run this query and see the data come back. So I can see that Poland is the big user of my application, Germany a little bit, Belgium a little bit, and so on. The query for this is quite simple. From my requests, where the timestamp is longer ago than yesterday, summarize by country and region, give me the top 10 by the number of users, and then render a pie chart. If you would prefer a bar chart, we can simply change this, go, and we would get a bar chart. If you would prefer a table, we can simply render a table, and we would see our information like this. So that's quite powerful. given that I'm running a free format query on top of a lot of data. There's a couple of other things in there, a couple of other examples, like, for example, the number of errors that happened in my application. So I can see that I had a lot of file not found exceptions in my application. I can drill into them, see which method and which request this error came from, and so on. The nice thing is that I can also query custom metrics. So for example, with this number of invoices that were created per customer, I could also write a query that says, okay, from my custom metrics, fetch me the customer ID, then give me the number of invoices per customer ID and render a pie chart. If I were to run this one, what I would see is a pie chart that says, okay, these are all the different customers and they made this amount of orders. The reason why this is sort of a funky pie chart is that in my demo application, I'm just creating a new fake customer ID for every single order. But imagine someone would be ordering 5 things, I would see the pie chart grow for that specific customer there. All right, let's run this on some production data of a bigger application and look into a couple of things. So what I'm interested in is in all the requests from yesterday that had an exception occur. What I can do is create a query from my requests where it's longer ago than today, where they were not successful, join with the exceptions table, with the exceptions dimension, summarized by the number of exceptions and the operation name and the exception message, and then the number of exceptions. If I run this one, what I would see is a nice table giving me all the different exceptions that occurred in my application by operation name. So this operation had 1 exception. This operation had 1 exception. I can order them as well. So if I do descending, I should get some more interesting details. So these would probably be the requests that I have to look into and start optimizing in my application. So I also ran a load test against the application, and you can see that my load test yielded over 43,000 exceptions in my application this morning. Well, I can drill into that one and see, okay, this was the request, and I can start adding more information to my view and start looking into why this specific request was throwing this amount of exceptions, which is really, really nice. Another view there could be selecting feature usage. So what we do in this application here is for everything you do, we log a custom metric. So if you do something in the application, we log this user did that operation in the application. Why? Because we want to know which features are being used most. Well, what I can do is simply run a query where I say from my custom events, select the top 10 of the features that are being used, run the query, and then look into all the different features that are being used. And for example, configuring a build source is only on the 7th place in there. Maybe we should do more marketing about this specific feature. Or maybe we should just cancel the feature because no one is using it. So there's a lot of options there and a lot of data that we can use to deduce, but it's really useful to be able to query all that information. I could also link this to the user that was actually using this feature. So I can maybe try to reach out to the customer and ask, why are you using this feature? Why are you not using this feature? Do you know of this feature, etc. So next to all my traces, next to all my logging, I can also use these metrics to basically find out which consumer is, or which customer is using a specific feature there. There's a lot of queries you can do. Do keep in mind this runs on top of over 50 million data points. And it's insane fast to get all the data out of it. So that's why I think it's one of the really, really nice features in there. Right, things that I did not cover in this talk. If you go to my blog, you will see that my latest blog post is on exactly this thing, the telemetry pipeline. All the data that you send off to Application Insights, you can basically sit in that pipeline, similar to an ASP.NET middleware, where you can change things in the pipeline. So for example, if you want to log the current claims identity of a user that is logged into your application, well, you could sit in the middle of that pipeline and add some asterisks there so that you don't send the actual token over the wire, for example. Or you could do things like sampling. Maybe I'm not interested in all the different events that are happening in my application. Maybe I think that I can find out what's going on in my application by only sampling 20% of all the traffic? Well, I can do that by sitting in this telemetry pipeline and just discarding messages as they pass right before they are being sent off to Application Insights. I did not show you the Visual Studio plugin for Application Insights. If you don't like using a browser, you can do a lot of the things that I was doing in the browser using the Visual Studio plugin, slice and dice, run some queries and things like that. Another nice one is continuous export. By default, Application Insights only keeps, I think it's 7 days worth of data. What if I want to find out which user had a specific exception 5 weeks ago? There's no way to find out except if you enable continuous export. So what you can do is all the data that comes into Application Insights, you can basically ship that off to a storage container on Azure and then run your own logic on top of that and do some further slicing and dicing based on what you want to do there. Another one that I still haven't been able to join because it's still in a private preview, but there is a feature in the portal there, if you go to this Application Insights Analytics, where you can upload your own data sets and then join that data set with all the information that's in Application Insights. So if I were to do an export of my customer data from my CRM, I would be able to run a query and figure out on which address or which order or which invoice from my CRM system this specific requests apply to, and so on. So sounds interesting and something I really want to experiment with. Now, in conclusion, the main thing I want to take you away from this talk is that you want to have logging and you want to have diagnostics for several reasons. Troubleshooting, figuring out why something went wrong, figuring out performance and cost of your application. Can we make it faster? Did the application get slower since our last deployment? Improving your application by fixing bugs that may be visible from all the data that you are gathering. Analyzing trends like, do I need bigger servers? Do I need to invest more in this feature and less in that other feature? Figuring out customer experience, like how fast is this Angular application loading and rendering in the browser? Should I make it faster or not? And making business decisions on top of all that data. So do log, do use structured logging, and do use something like AppInsights where you are able to make sense of all the data that you are sending there. Do use structured logging, as I said, for enriching your technical logs with business data and correlating the information you have. There's no use in just having simple string data. Do add meaningful objects that give you a chance of figuring out what's going on in the application. With that, thank you for being here and enjoy your lunch and the rest of the conference. Thanks.
Thank you.